Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson, and I am a yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I'm also a musician and kirtan artist, amongst other things. Today, I wanted to speak a little bit about the limitations of your story. But before I get into that, I do want to thank the community that makes these talks possible, and those are my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to join that community, check out the links below. You can also leave me a tip via PayPal or Venmo, and if you're on YouTube, you can help out by liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting. I also have a shop full of merch that a friend and I put together, and you can check that out. There is a QR at the beginning and end of every video, and again, links down below. All right, so the limitations of your story. I made some notes for today's talk, so you might see me looking down at my phone from time to time, and that's so I can stay on track. All right, so as human beings, we are storytelling machines. We tell a narrative, and that comes from a perspective that we could call our own. In a sense, there's nothing really wrong with this, but what you'll likely find is, for many people, if not most people, the story isn't a particularly happy one or a inspiring one. Very often our story can be quite depressing and sad. And we have different stories about different topics in our lives. So I might feel like I am very good at my job and I'm valued there, and yet I might feel like in my personal life I don't get any respect or love. So it's not like we have necessarily one story, but we tell ourselves many stories about who we are, who we think we are to other people, how the world treats us, and all of the above. So again, this isn't necessarily a problem, except that for many people, the story that they tell causes suffering to themselves and sometimes to others as well. So being aware that you're telling yourself a story is a really important step. And what a lot of people might believe is, I'm not telling myself a story, that's just the truth, or that's just reality. But that's not actually true. There is no reality. There is no your narrative is the one correct narrative and every other narrative is incorrect. The world just doesn't work that way. So I'm not saying your perspective is entirely wrong or erroneous, but it's very limited. So for one thing, your story comes from past experience. And very often what we're telling ourselves is something along the lines of, let's just say, I want to be a billionaire. And maybe I've struggled with money my whole life. And so I will unconsciously, it's not always conscious, but unconsciously I will tell myself that trying to be a billionaire is hopeless because I'm not a billionaire yet. I've never been a billionaire, and I don't see how I could be a billionaire. So therefore, I can't be a billionaire, or I'll never be a billionaire. So stories are usually, again, from the past, and they project into the future. They predict the future, if you will, about ourselves. This is why they can be create so much suffering. Is, again, maybe I haven't found success up to this moment, but who's to say I can't find it in the next moment? But this isn't generally the way our minds work. Our minds are predictive machines, and they take what was true in the past and they try and say, okay, well, if this was true in the past, then this is likely to be true in the future. And so again, if we really are just living in the present moment and we aren't doing that, we won't really have a problem. But this isn't what most of us do. So being aware of your story, recognizing that it comes from your past experience and that it is likely coloring your idea of what the future will be. But there really is no guarantee that the future will be like the past. Byron Katie, who's a teacher that I've been quoting a lot lately for whatever reason, she likes to say, you know, this is true until it isn't. And that is a very enlightened point of view. Something is true until it isn't. Reality doesn't need our permission to change. So we human beings, we create all kinds of laws. So we'll say the law of gravity or light speed is this way. Well, really, in reality, there's nothing saying that it can't be different than it is right now. There's absolutely nothing. The only thing we have is that it's been the same or similar in the past since we've been measuring and looking at things. But even quantum science, quantum physics tells us that just by observing a thing, you change it. So there really is no observer-independent reality. And when we can really grasp this concept, it really leads an interesting perspective to the idea of our story. So if there is no observer-independent reality, and I have this story that I believe is true, and I'm observing reality, maybe I'm actually influencing the way that reality is operating with that story. It's interesting to think about. So a story is by nature a limited narrative. If we take any story, we have to take a perspective or several perspectives in order to tell that story. You could say there's always two or more sides to a story, right? If we have an antagonist and a protagonist, they will be in conflict. We could tell the same story from one point of view, and somebody who looks like a good guy from that point of view might be seen to be the bad guy from another point of view. And this is partly due to the fundamental nature of reality, of what ultimately is. Our true nature has the ability to adopt any perspective, really. That's how free it is. That's how powerful it is. So to say that because a perspective is mine, that means it's ultimately true or it's the only perspective, this is just incorrect and ignorant to say that. But this is how many of us, again, operate in life. Now, maybe this wouldn't be so bad if the perspective that we had was, again, a positive one, if the story we're telling was positive. But as I said, many of us will tell quite negative stories based on very often a few experiences, very often when we're young. So we'll take a little bit of data from when we're very impressionable and very young, and we will draw conclusions about ourselves and about reality, and then we will just basically repeat that to ourselves unconsciously without realizing it's a story, and we'll go through our lives behaving according to that story, the character that we're telling ourselves that we are. So an important key point to understand is that we don't know what we don't know, and that there's a lot more that we don't know than we do know. as I've said in a prior video, I think it was even last week, we currently, science estimates, we know 4% of what is in existence, and that 96% of what is out there in the universe is unknowable given our current level of understanding and equipment that we have to measure things. So 96% of what we know is out there, and there might be more that we don't know. But 96% of it is something called dark matter and dark energy. And it's called dark matter and dark energy because we can't see it, we can't measure it, we can't smell it, taste it, touch it. No instrument can view it. None of our scientific instruments. So how do we know it's there? Well, because it's affecting what we can see. It's having an effect on what we can see, okay? So if, let's say, for example, there was a room and it was full of animals, and we release an invisible gas that kills all living things into that room, and all of a sudden all the animals drop dead. Even though we can't see the gas with our eyes, we could conclude that there's a poisonous gas because all the animals are dead. So even though we can't see the gas, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, we can see its effect on other things. So this is what it's like with dark matter and dark energy. So I think this is a humbling fact. We human beings, each one of us, has a very limited amount of information. Even the smartest, most brilliant human being on the planet is still limited. And then if we take all of human knowledge, we might expand that a little bit, but still very limited. And then if we say everything that we can currently know as human beings, again, is 4% of what's out there, 96%, so most of what's out there, is unknowable to us. It's a mystery to us. And I think it's important for us as human beings to remind ourselves of this. I spoke last week about being humble, and that, again, is a tool that we can use, and we can use it in this instance. If I'm telling myself a story about my life and about what's possible for me, who I am, what I can do, again, if it's an encouraging story, if it's a story that's uplifting, if it makes me happy and it helps me interact with other people in a harmonious way, then that's beautiful. No harm in it. But if it's a story that makes me cantankerous, it upsets me, it depresses me, it makes my relations with others strained, then we really have to question, is that story really true? And as I've already alluded to, no story is 100% true. No story is every perspective. No story is every story, right? Because we could tell, again, the same story from different perspectives, and we essentially end up with a different story. So your life according to your mother would be different than your life according to you. Your life according to your children would be different than your life according to you. Your life according to your teachers, okay? So we all have a different story to tell, even about the same life. There's not one correct perspective. So there's much more we don't know than we do know. And so that's humbling and hopefully allows us to recognize that our story isn't quote unquote true. Again, elements of our story may correspond with our experiences, but there's no absolute truth in it. And there's also nothing saying that the story can't change in the next moment. So that's an important thing to understand. you can change your story. Or at the very least, you can recognize that it is not ultimate truth. I think, in my experience, even just letting go of a negative story and recognizing that it's not ultimately true, that there are elements that we might not be seeing or recognizing, and just softening that can be so helpful. So this can be very freeing and empowering because most people's story, as I already alluded to, can be quite negative, can be quite dark, can be quite depressing. So this is, again, something worth exploring. A lot of what I share here are not the specific techniques I learned as a yoga teacher, but they are thought tools. They are things that you can use throughout your day to hopefully change your perspective and live a happier and healthier life. So becoming aware of the story that you're telling yourself, the limitations that that story puts on you, and just noticing it is the first job, of course. This is where meditation and other mindfulness practices can become so helpful, is I can't change my story or let go of it if I'm not aware that it's a story, if I actually think it's true. And usually it's the body that makes it real. The body will feel like this is true, this is real. And that's what gives it its power. But again, with enough practice and awareness, we can begin to recognize that my body will react to things that are not true. For instance, if I were to come into your home and rig your devices such that I could control what shows up on them, and then one night you come home and then I begin to broadcast a fake news alert that the end of the world is going to happen in an hour or 3 hours. There's a meteorite hurtling towards the earth and you only have 3 hours to live. And if I could do this in a convincing way, you would feel in your body probably terror and fear and sadness and all kinds of emotions, even though there's no truth to it. It was a lie. It was false. Okay, so again, the body will react to the mind, and the mind doesn't necessarily know what is true and what is not. And you could say, in a sense, the human mind really can't know what is ultimately true. In order for us to experience ultimate truth, we have to transcend the human mind. And when we experience that, it really is beyond words. It's beyond description. It's beyond understanding. It's not something that we can then explain to someone else in a logical way. It's something that really needs to be seen and experienced. So it's something we can experience, but we only really experience it by transcending the mind, that part of ourselves. The mind's never going to really get it. So the mind has its limitations, and the body tends to react to what the mind is doing. So again, very powerful when we recognize the mind is very limited, our senses are very limited, our perspective is limited. And then we can experience life with an openness and a freedom and a beauty that each moment is fresh and new, and life can be completely different from that point on. Because just because something was true a moment ago, it doesn't mean it needs to be true going forward. It doesn't even mean that it was true a moment ago. As I said, many times our stories are not actually true. So I might be telling myself I'm unlovable, and yet I might be blind to the fact that there are many people who love me very deeply. I've seen this working with people one-on-one doing inquiry, is people will sometimes have these ideas buried deep in their unconscious, like I am unlovable. And yet around them are people that love them and they simply can't see it. All right, everyone. So as always, I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. If you found this helpful and you'd like to help me out, then again, you can leave a tip, a comment, you can share this, you can become a patron, and you can buy some merch. Until next time, everyone, namaste and have a beautiful, beautiful day.